Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Crime Uncut. I've decided to make this video after I recently watched a Netflix documentary called Murder by the Coast. It's a very good program, and I would certainly recommend that you watch it. It deals with the murder of 19-year-old Rocío Wannikhof and with the events that followed afterwards, which led to probably one of the greatest legal mistakes in modern Spanish history. To make this video, I have done extensive research using sources in the public domain, particularly newspaper articles. And with the assistance of Google Translate, I have read probably over 100 articles. Also found some court documents which I translated. I watched many YouTube videos and I've listened to podcasts. I have made a concerted effort to educate myself about the details and nuances of this case and present these facts to you as accurately as possible. If there are inaccuracies, they will be of a minor nature. I apologize, that's just the way it's been written. I have found many mistakes and inconsistencies in the articles that I have read, and I hope I have reconciled them. If there are any mistakes, I would appreciate if you could bring them to my attention. Thank you. I'm confident, ladies and gentlemen, that in the English language, this video will exceed any other YouTube video in accuracy and comprehensiveness. I'm going to delve deep into this case. There are many layers to it, but please stick with me right to the end. At first, to Rocío's family, my deepest sympathy. I know you felt her loss very deeply, and you still do to this very day. No family should have to go through what Rocío's family went through. In October 1999, Rocío was 19 years old and she lived with her mother Alicia Hornos and her sister Rose in La Cala de Mijas on Spain's Costa del Sol. He also had a brother Guillermo, and I'm not sure whether he was living with them or not at the time. Now, the coastal regions of Andalusia along the Costa del Sol are very popular with British expats who settled there. Attracted by the sea, the beaches, the good weather, the Spanish lifestyle, culture, and of course the food. Now, Rocío worked part-time as a babysitter for the famed British millionaire Clifford Stanford. Now, Rocío's parents divorced in 1983 and her mother retained custody of the children. Now, in 1981, when Rocío was only 1 year old, while separating from her husband, Alicia met another woman called Dolores Vasquez, and they started an intimate emotional relationship. Now, as lesbian relationships were not well accepted in society at the time, they tried to keep the true nature of their relationship a secret. Dolores was born in Galicia, the northern parts of Spain, but was raised and educated in England, where she lived until she was about 20 years old. Then she moved to Spain to work in the hospitality industry, and eventually she became the manager of the Sultan Hotel in Marbella. And at the time, Alicia was working as a cleaner for a timeshare company. According to Alicia, Dolores helped her a lot when she separated from her husband. Together with Alicia's young children, they went on vacation, they went to the beach, amusement parks, etc. Alicia once said that Dolores was lovely with the children and that Dolores was the great love of her life. For her, I felt things that I have not felt before for my husband. In 1982, Alicia and her children moved into Dolores' house and they lived together as a family. Now, it is said that Dolores played the role of a father, and she would pick up the children, bathe them, give them dinner, etc. And it is said that Dolores was strict and had high expectations for the children, especially as it relates to doing well at school, doing chores around the house, and keeping a clean and neat appearance. Nonetheless, Rocío and Rosa were open about their affection for Dolores. For example, in school, they told their friends that they had two mothers, and they would use the surname Vasquez Hornos in place of the legal surname Wannikhof Hornos. At some point, Rocío gave Dolores a little notebook in which she wrote,
"You are such a pretty girl, so nice, so kind, so beautiful, and so chubby. I give you this little notebook. So I love you as much as this heart, and if I didn't love you it would break like this one.
It is possible, however, that when Rocío reached adolescence, that friction developed between her and Dolores. Much has been said by several people about the relationship between Rocío and Dolores, and I don't always find these sources trustworthy and unbiased, and it's difficult to separate fact from fiction. In 1987, 5 years after they started living together, Alicia and Dolores bought a chalet in the La Chaparral residential area of Cala de Mijas, and it is an upper-class area. It is said that after this move, their relationship deteriorated, such that they ended their relationship in 1988. However, they continued to live together and remain on good terms until about 1994, when, according to Alicia, coexistence became impossible. It seems that one of the main reasons for the relationship ending was that there was a dispute over the ownership of the chalet. Even though Alicia contributed 18 million pesetas from the sale of a previous home, it seems that only Dolores' name was in the title deed of the house. After Alicia could not resolve the dispute on the advice of her mother, she decided to cut her losses and to move out into a new apartment not too far away in the La Cochera residential area. Despite this, Alicia continued to remain friends with Dolores and to visit her. Alicia alleges that another reason for the separation from Dolores was the deteriorating relationship between Dolores and her children, especially Rocío. Now, Alicia also started a relationship with a man, and I presume this might have been part of the reason why they completely severed ties in 1997. In 1999, Dolores was still living in a chalet, taking care of her mother who was disabled after having suffered a stroke. So now let's get to that fateful day, the last day of Rocío's short life, October the 9th, 1999. That evening the temperature was a mild 18 degrees with a light breeze and a partly cloudy sky. There was no moon visible that evening, as it was a new moon. In 1999, it looked quite a bit different from what it looks like today. This is where Rocío lived, and the construction of this residential complex started in about 2000. However, it appears that some of the site preparation work was already in progress by October 1999. At 5:30 p.m., Rocío left her home to walk to her boyfriend Tony's home, which was about 500 meters away. At the time, he still lived with his mother. While hanging out, they discussed going to a fair in Piongirola. This fair was an annual event, 4 days of music, dance and food, and was very popular with the locals and tourists. Now, Rocío already made plans to meet friends there. Tony said that he was tired and might not go to the fair, but encouraged Rocío to go nonetheless. He said that if he could make it, that he would meet her there. At about 9:45 p.m., after Tony's mother pulled up the zipper of her sweatshirt to make sure that she stayed warm, Rocío left Tony's house to walk back alone to her home to shower and get changed to go to the fair. Apparently, this was the first time that Rocío walked home alone. Normally, Tony would give her a ride on his motorbike, or Rocío's mother and sister would pick her up. She would have walked along this road, uphill, which although it resembled a rural road, it did have a sidewalk and a few streetlights. Then, at this approximate location, someone attacked Rocío, killed her, hit her body in this field, and returned a few hours later to take her to a different location. But more about that later. The next morning, when Rocío's mother discovered that Rocío had not come home, she sent Rosa to Tony's place to find out where Rocío was. Tony told Rosa that he didn't go to the fair after all because he fell asleep, but not to worry. Others saw Rocío there, and that she probably just stayed overnight at a friend's house. They called Rocío's cell phone, there were no answer. They also called some of her friends, and none seemed to know where she was. Now here we have Tony telling a lie. He said that others saw Rocío at the fair, which wasn't true. Why? If I have to guess, he was probably so convinced that Rocío was safe and that she did go to the fair, that he didn't have a problem telling a little white lie to put Rosa and her family's anxious minds at ease until Rocío made an appearance. Very worried about Rocío, in the early afternoon while taking a walk to clear her head, Rocío's mother and her partner came across this big blood stain in this open field. At first they thought someone killed an animal, but then they found a blood-stained pair of sports shoes, which the mother knew belonged to Rocío. Immediately she knew something was wrong, and they called the civil guard. The civil guard arrived and cordoned off the area, and they started a detailed investigation of what appeared to be a crime scene. Close to this road, they found a tissue with blood on it, and in this general area they found blood drops on the road, and investigators believe that the assault on Rocío started at the road. There she received a wound that bled profusely, likely from being stabbed by a sharp object. They then observed a trail of blood away from the road into the open field, ending in a large blood stain. It appears that after the attack at the road, she fled into the open field, but then collapsed or was brought down and immobilized by the assailant at the location of this large blood stain. And there the attack on her continued. From here they observed drag marks from the body being dragged by the assailant down a steep slope to a position near this dirt road where the second large blood stain was found. Now, judging by the amount of blood required to make this blood stain, investigators concluded that the person whose blood it was died from an excessive loss of blood. A week later, the results of the DNA testing confirmed that the blood on the tissue, the shoes, and in the dirt belonged to Rocío. Investigators figured that the body was dragged to the location of the second blood stain because it was more hidden, more out of sight. I think it was also because it was closer to the road, which would have made it easier for the assailant to pick up the body later. Investigators found tire tracks, presumably on this road, and they knew that it likely belonged to the perpetrator because the tire marks were on top of the drag marks and the blood marks. They concluded that the assailant returned with a vehicle about 2 to 4 hours later to remove the body. Later, they determined that the tracks were made by a Ford Fiesta, the tires of which went out of production in 1993. Now, these lines show the approximate location of the dirt road that was there in 1999. The body was most likely dragged down this slope. You can also see the slope here behind Rocío's mother. Because of its steepness, investigators figured that it would have been difficult for just one person to drag the body, so they thought that more than one person must have been involved in the assault on Rocío. All I'm going to say, ladies and gentlemen, any average person would have been able to drag a body down the slope by the armpits. A body that probably only weighs about 60 kilograms. I just don't understand how the investigators came to this conclusion. So at the crime scene, the investigators also found a cigarette butt of the Royal Crown brand. This butt was analyzed with DNA, and they found that the DNA belonged to a male. They supposedly could not find a matching profile in national and international databases. It was also considered that this cigarette could have been from one of the many bystanders who gathered in the open field after the shoes and the blood were found, or that it was even deposited there before Rocío's murder. Now, it does not seem as if investigators found any shoe prints that may have belonged to the assailant. 3 days later, a taxi driver came forward. He said that on the night of Rocío's disappearance, he was driving along the road which Rocío would have walked on, and at about 10 p.m., he saw an SUV parked on the shoulder with the headlights on facing the wrong way. And as he passed, he heard a scream. It scared him, so he just closed the windows of his car and he drove on. 2 days later, a massive area-wide search effort was launched. More than 1,000 people combed 14 kilometers of coastline and about 150 square kilometers of mountainous terrain, streams, reed beds, ravines, wells, and sewers, and nothing was found. On October the 17th, the Civil Guard organized a search consisting of groups of vehicles with 6 to 8 cars in each group. Each participant was given a sticker with a group number on it that was supposed to be worn on the chest, and these stickers were specially made by the local parish priest for the search effort. Now, the same priest offered to receive any clue about Rocio's whereabouts under the secrecy of confession. Now, it's not inconceivable that whoever attacked and killed Rocío participated in the search for his or her own perverted pleasure. The British millionaire for whom Rocío worked as a babysitter offered a reward of £40,000 for any clues about Rocío's whereabouts. And on October the 31st, the civil guard suspended the search effort. However, the family and volunteers continued the search. Now let's see how this case started going wrong. Remember that at the crime scene, the investigators found a tissue with bloodstains on. Now on October the 18th, while the search for Rocío was still in full swing, a lawyer working for the Wanninkhov family made a statement to the media that since Rocío's attacker later used the tissue to clean herself, they must have known each other. Remember that Rocío's body hasn't been found yet, and that they did not know how she was attacked or killed. Now the gullible media published it as if it was a fact, and the public and the police accepted it as such. And over the time it even grew a little tale, that it was actually the attacker who offered the tissue to Rocío after attacking her and before killing her. A senior investigator later even testified in court. They knew each other since the aggressor gave the victim a tissue to clean herself. I have not seen anything like it in 21 years of service. At about 11 a.m. on November the 2nd, 1999, presumably to investigate the source of a foul smell his employees complained about, the owner of the Altos del Rodeo Sports Club discovered a body in an enclosure adjacent to some tennis courts. The body was underneath a tree, close to a fence and loosely covered with dried leaves. Now the Altos del Rodeo Sports Club is near Marbella, about 30 kilometers or 20 minutes drive away from Cala de Mijas. When officers arrived, they discovered that the body was completely naked with its legs spread open. It was completely unrecognizable, in an advanced state of decomposition, almost skeletal, like it has been decomposing for 4 to 6 months. And since Rocío has at most been dead for only 24 days, they thought that the body couldn't be hers. Next to the body, they found black industrial-sized garbage bags. Some were joined together with adhesive tape to form a shape of a shroud that was presumably used to transport the body in, and another bag contained various items, clothing and jewelry. And the bag did not contain a cell phone or any clothing from the waist down, in other words, pants or underwear. At about 9 p.m. that evening, the parish priest informed Rocío's mother, who was with Dolores at the time, that the body had been found. The investigators first approached Rocío's mother to examine the items found in the bags. She couldn't, so the task fell to Rosa. So Rosa recognized the white t-shirt and a ring that belonged to Rocío. According to the parish priest, when Rocío's mother heard the news, she almost fainted, screamed and broke something, while Dolores shivered and then vomited. A few days later, on November the 4th, the results of a DNA testing confirmed that it was indeed Rocío's body. Now, the rapid rate of decomposition has been attributed to the cumulative impact of heat, high humidity, and flesh-eating wasp. It appears that there has also been an attempt to burn the body, but that it likely got doused by rain. Our crime scene investigators found the following evidence at the crime scene. On one of the bags was written the number 8. They found 2 fingerprints on the garbage bags, but these could never be matched to anyone. They found a partial fingerprint on a piece of adhesive tape. It was of poor quality and not considered suitable for analysis. They found a hair inside one of the black plastic bags. It did not belong to Rocío. It did not have a root attached. And apparently with the technology at the time, they could not do a DNA analysis on the hair. The DNA testing on the hair was only completed 5 years later. They found 2 textile fibers. There were footprints that could not be matched to anyone. And they found a sticker similar to what a priest made, and it was distributed among members of the search groups. The number that was written on it has washed off because of rain, and the sticker still had its backing on, meaning that it was never used as intended. Now, the investigators considered the location remote and difficult to get to, leading them to conclude that the person who dumped the body was familiar with the area. The fact that the sticker was found at the scene and that the bags appeared to be very clean led them to conclude that the perpetrator must have returned to the scene later on. Remember that the sticker was only distributed on October the 17th, 2 weeks after Rocio's disappearance. They also figured that since the body wasn't hidden very well, that the perpetrator wanted the body to be found. I think the question as to why the perpetrator drove 30 kilometers to dispose of the body puzzled the investigators, and they couldn't quite figure it out. This led, as you will see, to a rather ridiculous conspiracy theory that helps steer the investigation in a wrong direction altogether. I also find it puzzling, considering that within 10 kilometers of the primary scene, we have a remote rural area with many dirt roads where it would have been easy to dispose of a body, with much less risk of being seen. I do think, however, that the perpetrator probably expected that this area would be searched extensively, so the body was disposed at a location well outside of the main search area. Although the perpetrator probably didn't mind the body to be found eventually, he or she did not want the body to be found too quickly. It's okay not to know all the answers. It's better to acknowledge that and to work around it than having to come up with a crazy theory with no evidentiary or factual basis. But more about this later. The autopsy found that there were blows to the face, the nasal septum and upper jaw, and that she was stabbed once in the left section of the chest and 8 times in her back. The stab to the left section of the chest would have been the most damaging, as it would have affected several organs and arteries. This would have incapacitated her almost immediately. And when she fell, she was stabbed in the back 8 times. 5 of those stabs collided with the ribs and 3 penetrated between the vertebrae. They found that the wounds were all caused by the same weapon, a thin single-edged razor. However, the body was too decomposed to determine whether a sexual assault took place. Now, just because it was not possible to determine if a sexual assault took place, the investigators proceeded on the assumption that no assault took place. And that's wrong. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Rocio's funeral took place in Arroyo de la Janco, the town in which her mother grew up, on November 21st. More than 1,000 people attended. She was laid to rest in a crypt, the tombstone of which was paid for by Dolores. Naturally, the funeral was televised. The day before the funeral, Rocio's mother told the media that the civil guard warned her to be aware that they were going to be watching everyone's movements as everyone was under suspicion. A talk show host called Maria Teresa Campos, while commenting on the funeral, said the following, while referring to Dolores Vasquez.
How can you have such cold blood to be there at the funeral? There you have her, second from the left of the camera. What would this woman feel inside? How cold? Everyone who knows her says that she is cold and calculating, but not to the point of being there in the front row holding on.
Now at this time, Dolores, as you will see later, was already one of several suspects, but has not yet been named as the prime suspect in this case. I think that although she was born in Spain, Dolores was very much the product of her British upbringing. It is generally accepted that Spanish people are generally more community-orientated, less formal, more emotionally expressive, more relaxed. And because Dolores wasn't like this, and because she wasn't as emotionally expressive as people expected her to be, especially at the funeral, people considered her cold, unfeeling, and aloof. Now, the investigators decided to rule sexual assault out as a motive. For some reason they thought that the legs were spread open to create the false impression that it was a sexual assault. Somehow the cruelty of the attack on Rocío, especially the presence of 8 stab wounds in her back, in a tight grouping, suggested to the investigators that it was a crime of passion, uncontrolled aggression, of anger, revenge and resentment, the type of emotions that may typically develop between two people that share strong emotional connections. Now, according to a forensic expert who was also a pathologist and a psychiatrist, and who also participated in the recovery of Rocío's body, the aggressor suffered a loss of impulse control and mental alienation, which are compatible with crimes of passion. Now, this murder was covered extensively in the media, especially on television, not just on news broadcasts, but also on special talk shows. And that gave the opportunity for non-experts to weigh in with their theories. For example, the Netflix documentary shows an interview with Margarita Lundy. She was a renowned crime journalist who only had a diploma in criminology. And this is how she answered after the host asked her if it could be a crime of passion.
Someone very close to the family. Very well known to the family. Very passionate and very resentful.
And then the host concluded, that is the expert opinion of Margarita Lundy, which I partly agree with. Now, in my opinion, the investigators, the forensic experts, the make-believe experts, they all made a lot of unsubstantiated assumptions while ignoring all other possible explanations. Now, I'm acutely aware that I have the benefit of hindsight. While it is true that in most femicides the perpetrator is known to the victim, and these are often crimes of passion, but there is no reason why the investigators should have discounted the possibility that Rocío's death was the work of a stranger. For example, a psychopathic serial killer or a serial rapist. Especially after they were told by Interpol that the dangerous serial rapist that fled from Britain was living and working in the area. Now let's look at the assumption that the body was staged. Now, if we assume that Rocío died at the primary scene and that her body was then transported to the second scene, then it is certainly possible that the perpetrator had sex with the corpse. Necrophilia is a thing. There are plenty of examples in recent history of serial killers or rapists having sex with corpses. Remember that due to the advanced state of decomposition, it could not be determined whether Rocío was sexually molested or not. Sometimes, instead of having intercourse with a corpse, perpetrators would just masturbate and may stage the body in a way to provide stimulation, to fuel their fantasies. Quite often, the staging of a body in a certain pose is part of the modus operandi of a serial killer. Jack the Ripper did that, for example. What about the 8 stab wounds in the back shouts out crime of passion? Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, stabbed a stranger, Wilma McCann, 12 times and hit her twice with a hammer, and it was not a crime of passion. Now consider the case of Sonia Karabrantes, who was murdered 2 years later in a town only about 14 kilometers away from where Rocío lived. One night, as she was returning home after attending a fair, she was abducted by someone in a car. A few days later, her body, naked from the waist down, was found hidden in a remote area under a pile of rocks. An autopsy found that she died from strangulation after receiving 37 blows to the head and the body. The perpetrator was apprehended by the police, and he was not someone in Sonia's social circle. It was not a crime of passion. Now, a very important question to ask is, did the crime go as the perpetrator planned? Did something perhaps go wrong? How did the perpetrator respond to that, and what emotions did this invoke? And may these emotions have led to the stabbing of the body 8 times? Let's look at the following alternative scenario. After seeing Rocío walking alone in the dark, the perpetrator decided to abduct her and then to take her somewhere else to assault her sexually. He starts by hitting her in the face to shock and to subdue her. But unexpectedly, she fights back. Perhaps she does something to him. kick him in the nuts, or scratches him. Now enraged, the perpetrator stabs her in the chest and she runs away and collapses. Now while still enraged, his primary motivation is now to make sure that she dies. Her survival is not an option. There is fear. Since he already had a knife, he decided to stab her. And it just happened to take him 8 times to be sure that she was dead. Remember that 5 of these stabs would have been ineffective due to hitting ribs. The tight grouping of the wounds is suggested of nothing other than the perpetrator and Rocío remaining in the same position while the stabs were delivered. Can anyone truly say that the above version should not have been considered? Now what about the bloody tissue? Many may think that it is unusual that Rocío was granted the time and the opportunity to retrieve her tissue and to clean herself with it. I think there's a very simple possible explanation that should have been considered. What if Rocío already had the tissue in her hand? Maybe she just used it or was planning to use it. And when she was punched in the face, her hands instinctively went up and the tissue got covered in blood. Now, based on the assumption that Rocío was not killed by a stranger and that the crime bears the hallmarks of a crime of passion, and possibly influenced by the family and the media experts, investigators decided to tunnel vision in on Rocío's social circle. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that people in the social circle should not have been investigated. Everyone, the mother, the boyfriend, the sister, the brother, the father, the grandparents, uncles, aunts, and friends all should have been investigated equally without fear and prejudice, until eliminated by alibis and or forensic evidence. But until conclusive evidence is found that incriminated someone in the social circle, the possibility that a stranger murdered Rocío should have been investigated to the fullest extent. And this was not done. It should be noted that the Ford Fiesta with its 1993 tires was never found, nor was the DNA on the cigarette but ever matched to anyone. The DNA of the hair that was found on Rocío's body wasn't even analyzed for DNA until 5 years later. Now, quite rightly, the first suspect that the police focused on was Rocío's boyfriend, Tony. He was a suspect even before Rocío's body was found. Allegedly, when he was brought in for questioning, he was mistreated by the police. They slammed his face down on the table and pulled his ears. Eventually, Tony was eliminated as a suspect because he didn't have a driver's license, and as such he could not have driven the body away from the crime scene. And the police also investigated and eventually eliminated Rocío's father, likely because he was in the Netherlands, where he lived at the time. Even the parish priest was a suspect, the same one who made the stickers to help in the search for Rocío, and the same one who broke the news of finding Rocío's body to the family. Now, investigators found it suspicious that he was so actively involved in the search efforts and took such an intense interest in the case. Now, the investigators also suspected an uncle and cousin of Rocío because they wanted to lease a restaurant called El Redeto, which was close to where Rocío's body was found. So they figured that the uncle and cousin were familiar with the area, and that made them suspects. However, they were eliminated as suspects after their alibis checked out. And then there is Dolores Vasquez, who quickly became the main suspect. It all started about a week after Rocío went missing, and that would be October the 16th. Now, while the police were re-inspecting the primary crime scene, they saw 2 young men in a red Toyota Celica. One of them got out, looked around the crime scene, and then got back in the car and drove off past the police officers. The police managed to take down the license plate, and it turned out that the car belonged to Dolores Vasquez. And when they asked Dolores about this, she denied that she had lent out her car. Now, this immediately made the police suspicious, and to them this was just one of many lies that Dolores told them. Later, Dolores clarified that she lent the car to 2 guys that were friends of the Horner's family, and that she simply forgot about it. It was at this time that investigators learned about her past relationship with Rocio's mother, and that it did not end on good terms, and that she was a lesbian. And they started probing into her private life and learned that she wasn't too popular in the neighborhood, with some people describing her as cold and calculating. Investigators also tapped Dolores' cell phone and home phone and kept it up for almost a year. Now let's get to the conspiracy theory I referred to before. Now, as mentioned before, an uncle and cousin of Rocío wanted to lease a restaurant in the general vicinity of where her body was found. And because Dolores had a bad relationship with the uncle, the investigators concluded that the body must have been dumped there by Dolores close to the restaurant and then staged to look like Rocío was raped to falsely implicate the uncle and to make trouble for him. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am not going to insult your intelligence by explaining how utterly and completely preposterous this conspiracy theory is. This is a case of an investigation working in reverse. Instead of following the evidence, you find the suspect and then you fabricate the evidence to confirm your choice. Now here is the location of the restaurant, and this is where the body was found. I really don't see why the business interest in a restaurant would compel them to drive around what must have been dirt tracks at the time. To say that there is a relation between where the body was found and the restaurant business is opportunistic at best, nothing but a handful of straw. At some point during the police's investigation, they interviewed a Ukrainian housekeeper who started working for Dolores shortly after Rocío went missing, and who at the time was working illegally in Spain. So already she had every incentive to make sure that she has good relations with the police. Just keep that in mind. Now, she told the police that she saw Dolores stab a search poster with a photo of Rocío on while screaming, "This is my problem, this is my problem." Admittedly, this does not sound good and somewhat incriminating. Later, when I cover the housekeeper's court testimony, I will provide more context and my thoughts about the incident. When trying to justify her behavior, Dolores couldn't give a clear answer, saying first that she was trying to explain that the poster came from one of the searches organized after Rocio's disappearance, and then she tried to explain to the housekeeper, who could not speak English or Spanish very well, how Rocío died. Now, the police also inserted a female agent, a spy, a psychologist, into Dolores' social circle. Apparently, she even once stayed overnight at Dolores' place. Now, based on her observations and anecdotes that she received from people in the community, she built a psychological profile of a butch lesbian that was cold, calculating, aggressive, prone to violent outbursts. Now, Dolores was interrogated by investigators on several occasions for hours on end. They just could not break her into a confession, and they thought that her responses and statements were riddled with lies, inconsistencies, and contradictions. Now, admittedly, Dolores did herself no favors by not always being honest and straight with the police. On the other hand, the police often just took the word of anyone else over Dolores' word. They could not always separate lies from truth. Now, it's always important to remember that sometimes innocent people lie. To live under a cloud of suspicion, especially if you're innocent, can be extremely stressful and bothersome. So the temptation will always be there for an innocent person to tell a lie to avoid or to lessen unwarranted suspicion. Especially if being a suspect could cost you in terms of your social standing, your relationship, your job, your finances, etc. Especially when the media and the family of the victim are paying for blood. Some mistakes, inaccuracies, and inconsistencies in statements of innocent people are normal and are just a reflection of how fallible people can be in recalling and reconstructing past events. Guilty people typically make a considerable effort to craft a narrative and then to rehearse and to memorize it. Thus, their versions tend to be highly consistent from one statement to another. But just because someone says something, even if it's in a sworn statement or under oath, does not necessarily mean it is the truth. Anyone can, under influence of their own bias or ulterior motives, lie, exaggerate, downplay, omit, interpret out of context, or simply make a simple mistake. Believe nothing until it can be corroborated by independent sources. Corroboration is key. And lastly, probably the most important of all, just because the police say so does not make it so. They can make mistakes, they are also fallible just like anyone else. And the same applies to defense lawyers, prosecutors, and judges. Now on July the 31st, 2000, 10 months after Rocio's murder, the police informed Rocio's mother that Dolores was the main suspect, but they were not 100% sure. This is how Alicia said she received the news. I couldn't believe what the police told me. She, my best friend, more than a friend. How could she have killed my daughter? It couldn't be, what the hell, my God. I thought she would die for me. Please don't let it be her. Don't let it be her. Anyone before her. A few weeks later, Alicia called Dolores on the phone to ask her if she killed Rocío, to which Dolores simply answered, "How can you think such a thing? How can you think such a thing?" On August the 20th, the Silver Guard announced that they had 3 suspects, 2 men and a woman, and then they started a competition in the media to discover the identity of the suspect, and then to start publishing information about the suspect, in complete violation of the constitutional rights of privacy and the presumption of innocence. For example, already the next day there was a newspaper headline, "A woman, main suspect in the murder of the young Rocío Wanninkhof." Another headline was, "Rocío Wanninkhof's killer is a friend of the family and resides in Mijas." On August the 31st, the El Mundo newspaper reported, I presume after interviewing Rocio's mother about the motive, as resentment and revenge directed at Rocio's mother because Rocio was responsible for the killer's separation from the family. In the same newspaper, Alicia is quoted as saying, "We were always clear that my daughter's murderer was a woman." On September the 5th, Dolores' name was published in the newspaper as being the main suspect, alongside a photo of her doing shopping. So when on Thursday, September the 7th, 3 female officers came to arrest Dolores, there was already a crush of reporters outside her house. And when the police called Rocio's mother to inform her of Dolores' arrest, again they said that they don't have all the evidence, but that they are sure it was her that killed Rocío. That same evening, the El País newspaper interviewed Rocio's grandfather and mother, and the grandfather said that he couldn't believe it. Dolores raised my grandchildren and loved them as if they were her children. The mother Alicia said that she does not know the motive that could have led Dolores to murdering her daughter. At first our relationship was closer. Although it later deteriorated, there were no arguments or anything. And 3 days later, on September the 10th, in another newspaper interview, Rocio's mother started to change tune. She said that she did not know the motive for the crime, but that she could assure that Rocío and Dolores never got along and that they argued often. She then described Dolores as a person who was aggressive to the maximum and very violent, and when angry she becomes like the devil. She even saw Dolores hitting her own mother once. She also elaborated more about the phone call in which she confronted Dolores as to whether she killed Rocío or not. Allegedly, after Dolores denied involvement, she told Dolores that not only did she murder her daughter, but she was also killing her while alive, to which Dolores supposedly answered that she knew it. Of course Dolores knew that Rocio's death was killing Alicia while alive. She saw and understood Alicia's pain. It's hardly incriminating nor an admission of guilt. 4 days after the arrest, on September 11th, renowned Spanish journalist and author Juan Manuel de Prada wrote the following article called Barren Love or Sterile Love. The woman who, according to the police investigation, chose Rocío Wanninkhof as the victim of her cruelty did so with the purpose of killing the person she loved most in life, who was the girl's mother. And she did it by erasing the breath of beauty, which was something her barren love, i.e. lesbian love, would never bring into the world. By murdering Rocío Wanninkhof, that woman was excluding the possibility of a love different from her own, a love that was fruitful and would last in another flesh. On September the 12th, an article appeared in a newspaper in which the owner of a kiosk where Dolores normally bought a newspaper every morning is quoted as saying that he or she remembers Dolores as a very cold woman who never spoke, with a stony face, low voice and icy gaze, and that she had very masculine gestures in the appearance of practicing some fighting sport. And then the article added, that is the key to Dolores' character, whose violent traits only emerge from time to time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is unbelievable. In all these examples I've given you, all these things that were published mere days after her arrest, where in all of this the presumption of innocence, innocent until proven guilty. Now, according to Dolores, after the arrest, the police put her in a small room, and because they knew that she was scared of the dark, they kept turning the light on and off while telling her it was you, it was you. They supposedly also told her that when we are finished with you, not even your lawyer will believe in you. The next day, Dolores appeared before a judge to determine if she could be provisionally released until her trial. I guess that is what we call a bail hearing. The prosecution submitted 21 pieces of circumstantial evidence against Dolores. The judge and the prosecutor were apparently surprised how Dolores could so calmly and steadfastly maintain her innocence, and that made them think that they were dealing with a cold person. Now, the justice system was so focused on her as being guilty that anything she would have said would have been seen as incriminating. If she became angry, they would have taken that as evidence of a violent nature, and because she stayed calm and collected, it was taken as evidence of a cold and calculating nature. As she had a sister in the UK, it was considered a flight risk, and possibly to protect her against people in the community that wanted to harm her, the judge ordered that Dolores remain in prison until her trial, which was only scheduled for about a year later. Now, I speculate that the real reason they wanted her in prison was to control her environment, to see if they could break her into confessing, to spy on her. The judge could easily have confiscated her passport, placed her under house arrest, and provided security while taking action against those who threatened her with violence. An investigator admitted in court that at that time their investigation had stalled and that arresting her gave them the opportunity to advance their investigation. Now, doesn't one first complete your investigation before you arrest someone? With Dolores now safely tucked away in prison while facing abuse from other prisoners over her sexual orientation, the police now had the opportunity to look for definitive evidence by searching Dolores' house. And this they did the day after the arrest, on Friday, September the 8th. During this search, the police found various items of sports clothing, tracksuit pants, and a sweater. And these were sent to the Institute of Toxicology. Yes, you heard me right, the Institute of Toxicology, for a microscopic comparison with the fibers that were found where Rocío's body was dumped. In a press conference, the prosecutor and the civil guard declared that the two fibers were a match to Dolores' sports clothes. And because of the supposed certainty of this evidence, the prosecutor opposed the provisional release that was requested by Dolores' defense lawyer. The investigating judge denied the provisional release and Dolores remained in prison. Now, what was the real reason for this press conference? Would they not wait until the trial? Why was it so important that the public and potential jurors know that the fibers were a match to Dolores' clothes. How moral and how ethical was it for the prosecutor and the civil guard to reveal the results of this test in public, in advance of a trial, and not at the trial where Dolores' lawyer could have challenged the results? The Criminal Investigation Laboratory then requested to conduct a more detailed analysis of the fibers clothing. And on January the 12th, 2001, they released a report in which they concluded that Dolores' tracksuit had completely different morphological structure than the fibers, and although the sweater had a similar morphological structure to one of the fibers, spectral analysis shown that it had a completely different color. So the conclusion was that the fibers could not be matched to Dolores' clothing. And this after the prosecutor and the civil guard had a press conference telling the public in the media that the fibers were a match to Dolores' clothing. So let us be clear. The second analysis done by the Criminal Investigation Laboratory actually analyzed the internal molecular structure of the fibers, as opposed to the purely visual comparison that was done by the Institute of Toxicology. What the analysis of fibers had to do with toxicology is beyond me. And I wonder if the prosecutor and the civil guard held another press conference to set the record straight. If not, why not? A week later, on January 19th, after Dolores' lawyer again requested a provisional release, but before the judge rendered the decision, Rocio's mother was quoted in the press as saying, "I want Lolly to remain in jail until the day the trial takes place, because otherwise she would not make it to court alive. I will kill her with my own hands if she is released due to a lack of evidence. Any mother would do the same. I will do to her as she did with my daughter. She does not deserve compassion. Lolly's safety is not guaranteed outside prison. There are many people who are willing to kill her for what she did to my daughter." Dear Ms. Horner, while fully understanding your pain and suffering, no. No person, no other mother would have wanted to kill a person whose guilt has not been proven court of law, against whom there were no evidence of being guilty. So no mother would have done what you said you would do. And needless to say, the investigating judge denied the request for a provisional release, and Dolores remained in prison until her trial started in September 2001. Now, between Dolores' arrest and the start of the trial, Dolores was tried in the media and was found guilty. It's a textbook case of trial by media, or what is called a parallel trial. Rocio's family, especially her mother, sister and aunt, appeared on numerous television shows and interviews, were quoted in numerous newspapers and magazine articles, always painting Dolores as this terrible, abusive, violent person who never got along with Rocío, and who blamed Rocío for a breakdown in the relationship with him. Rocío's mother especially was given great prominence in the media, became a leading source of information. They considered her an extremely reliable source, untouched by any kind of emotional bias. And fearing not to come across as insensitive to a grieving family and going against popular public sentiment, many were quite content to turn a blind eye to the violation of Dolores' constitutional rights. The Spanish criminal justice system mandates that homicide cases must be heard by a jury. There would be 9 jury members who were selected from 35 people that were randomly selected from the province of Malaga. And considering the degree of media saturation after Dolores' arrest, it would have been extremely unlikely to find 9 local citizens that had not heard about the case or had not been influenced or that have not developed a bias against the accused. Then there is a process of jury selection, similar to what you see in American courtroom dramas. The defense and prosecution can put questions to the different members and can reject any candidate. Each side have 4 challenges without having to give a reason and 2 challenges with giving a reason. Now in Spain, unlike the American system, the jury decision does not need to be unanimous. To convict, only 7 out of 9 votes are needed, and to acquit, a simple majority of 5 votes are needed. Now here are some questions that were asked of potential jurors and their answers. We must, however, be cautious, as it is not uncommon that someone would give an outrageous answer simply not to be selected to the jury. To the question, does it affect you that the accused has been imprisoned for a year and arrives handcuffed? Now, several people answered along the lines of, if they put a person in jail for a year, they must have done something right. To the question, do you think it is better to convict an innocent person than to let a guilty person go free? And to this question, there were a lot of indecision and few forceful answers. To the question, for you, who has to prove innocence or guilt, the prosecution or the defense? Many people answered both. Some even said that the defense must prove innocence. To the question, if in doubt, would you convict or acquit? And the answers were diverse. One candidate, a 50-year-old man, who answered that he would acquit without a doubt, was apparently rejected by the prosecution. Apparently they feared that with his strong personality, he may influence other jury members to go along with what he wanted them to do. So it is clear that not only was the jury pool contaminated or biased after prolonged exposure in the media that Dolores is a killer, but they were also completely ignorant of the basic principles of justice. Presumption of innocence, innocent until proven guilty, that the onus is on the prosecution to prove guilt, that guilt must be established beyond reasonable doubt. The trial started on September the 3rd, 2001 and lasted 16 days. Now Dolores faced 2 prosecutors, a private prosecutor representing the Wanninkhoof family and then the normal state prosecutor. The trial was a circus of conjecture after conjecture aiming at eroding Dolores' character without presenting a single piece of direct evidence of her guilt. Since Dolores was a Galician, a butch lesbian, into sport, karate, not well liked in the community, and because she may have had a complicated relationship with the victim and the family, combined with her perceived dishonesty, she must therefore be guilty beyond reasonable doubt. Who needs actual evidence? Twice during the trial, the ringmaster had to caution the chief clown to start performing, to present actual evidence, because all the circumstances stuff he was juggling around was not going to cut it. Dolores testified in her own defense, where she maintained her innocence and denied that she and Rocío had a bad relationship, even after she was presented with an alleged transcript of a phone conversation she had with a friend in which he supposedly admitted that she and Rocío hated each other. Dolores explained that for a long time she fed Alicia and her 3 children and even gave Alicia 40,000 pesetas a month to pay for the mortgage on her house, and denied that she was severe with the children and that the only thing she forced on them was to keep themselves clean and to study. Now, Rocío's mother testified that Dolores always played the role of the father with the daughters and that she was very severe with them because he occasionally punished them. She cited as an example that one day Dolores cut Rocío's hair without her wanting to, and she once grounded Rocío for 3 months because she got in bad grades at school. Allegedly, once after Rocío got hit by Dolores, she told her mother, "Mom, one day she's going to kill me and you're not going to do anything." Rocío's mother explained why she tolerated Dolores' alleged bad treatment of Rocío. is because she was illiterate and she wanted to keep Dolores around the house to teach her children, even though she did not agree with many things. She also testified that Rocío was always opposed to her relationship with Dolores, and that if it wasn't for Rocío, she would have reconciled with Dolores. Okay, I need to make a few remarks here. She said that Rocío was always opposed to the relationship. Even when Rocío was little and everything seemed to have gone well with the family. Even when Rocío gave Dolores a little notebook expressing her love for Dolores. And if it wasn't for Rocío, she would have gone back to the person she previously said was violent to the extreme, who became like a devil when she's angry. Rosa, Rocío's sister, testified that Dolores killed Rocío out of revenge, since she considered Rocío the direct cause as to why she was not able to restart her relationship with Alicia. She also supported her mother's allegations that the relationship between Dolores and Rocío was not good, and that Dolores punished Rocío more severely than the other kids. Rosa testified when the police showed her photographs of the garbage bag that was found at the secondary crime scene, she knew it must have been Dolores because she is a perfectionist and the bags were closed and taped symmetrically. Really? Just because the bags were taped symmetrically, it had to be Dolores that killed Rocío? A psychologist testified that Dolores showed traits that bordered on schizophrenia. She was a domestic abuser, very authoritarian, easily triggered into uncontrolled temper tantrums. He also concluded that Dolores is a very manipulative type person and who, in order to obtain profit, shows a mask of sweetness. He testified that homosexuals, and especially repressed homosexuals, display more excessive violent behavior. Even if what Rocío's family said is true, even if there was a bad relationship, and even if the psychological profile is accurate, that is still not evidence of murder. A motive is still insufficient to establish guilt and convict someone. It needs to be backed up by direct evidence. The local parish priest testified that when he broke the news that Rocío's body was found or identified to Dolores, she vomited. He suggested that this might mean that she was possessed. Now, various investigators testified to confirm the following: that Dolores' fingerprints were not found on the black plastic bags or on the adhesive tape, that the textile fibers found at the scene did not match Dolores' clothing, that the tire tracks found at the primary scene did not match the tires of Dolores' car, and that Dolores did not use her car that evening, nor did she rent another car. That a cigarette butt was found from which they got the male DNA profile was not mentioned in court at all. The prosecutor explained to the jury, without presenting a shred of evidence, that instead of using her own car, Dolores stole the car of a tourist, as tourists are generally known to leave their cars unlocked with the keys in the ignition, or that she got someone to help her take the body away. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please imagine, if you can, that you have murdered someone and you don't want to get caught. You have been extremely careful. You did not leave behind any forensic or other evidence that would incriminate you. Why would you then, in the presence of a witness, take a knife and stab the photo of the victim while shouting, "Problema, problema, problema"? And this is what the Ukrainian housekeeper said Dolores did, supposedly on the day that Rocío's body was found, before it was even known that Rocío got stabbed with a knife. According to 3 different statements made by the housekeeper to the police, and according to Dolores herself, this incident occurred on November the 4th. That would be 2 days after the body was found. According to Dolores' court testimony, the housekeeper had asked for a day off. And according to Dolores, she did not want to give the housekeeper the day off, presumably because she wanted the housekeeper to stay and help out in the house during this difficult time. An argument ensued. The housekeeper could not speak English or Spanish very well, and there was a language barrier, and it's likely that the housekeeper did not fully understand the reasons Dolores was not going to give her a day off. And to better bring her point across, Dolores took a spoon or a fork and tapped on a poster and said, "This is my problem." What was the problem? Was Rocío a problem? Why would Dolores do it so openly then? Or was what the flyer represented the problem? That someone she loved went missing and was now dead. When the housekeeper testified, she suddenly changed the story and said that the event took place on November the 2nd, the same day that Rocío's body was found, when the cause of death was not yet known. And as Dolores allegedly stabbed the photo with a knife, this would seem to indicate that Dolores had prior knowledge on how Rocío died. According to the housekeeper, Dolores was very nervous those days. On this particular day, Dolores asked her to make a cup of tea for her mother. And the tea was cold. Dolores got upset and she threw the cup into the sink and started crying. She then saw Dolores with a dagger, which made her scared because she thought she might kill her. At that moment, she saw the accused take the poster and start stabbing it while saying "problema, problema, problema," leaving scratches in the sink. Then afterwards, Dolores even had to go lie down because of all the fury she displayed. The next day, Dolores asked her about the scratches, and she then had to explain to her what happened. So are we to believe that Dolores had such a breakdown that she could not remember stabbing the poster the previous evening with a knife, leaving scratches in the sink? And according to the housekeeper, that evening when Dolores found out about the discovery of the body, she started to cry very loudly. Now, I speculate that the housekeeper changed the story from November the 4th, which she confirmed in 3 different statements, to November the 2nd during the trial, because if she cooperated with the civil guard, they may assist her in getting a work permit. A psychic testified that a few months before Rocío's murder, Dolores came to see her. She allegedly told the psychic that she was in love with someone, that would be Alicia, and that Alicia's daughter, Rocío, was standing in the way of reconciliation. She said that Alicia would cry tears of blood and that she intensely hated Rocío. In court, she said that she came forward after seeing Dolores' arrest on television, and about a year later, in a television interview, the psychic said that the civil guard contacted her after they found her business card in Dolores' house, so she's been changing her story. Search records, however, show that there was no such business card ever found in Dolores' house. But the psychic has since publicly retracted her incriminating testimony, claiming that she must have misunderstood Dolores. A captain of the civil guard, who was one of the lead investigators in the case, testified that the concentrated grouping of 8 stab wounds on Rocío's back was a sign that the attack was a gay crime of passion. They give great importance to their feelings, he said. If you want a moment to cry or laugh, ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to pause the video for a moment. Regarding the alibi, a niece of Dolores testified that she and her husband and 2-year-old daughter arrived at Dolores' house on noon of the day of the murder. That would be October the 9th. That evening, they left at about 9 p.m. to have dinner at a friend's house, leaving their daughter in the care of Dolores. The friend at whose house the dinner was also testified that on the 9th, the niece and her husband came over to her house for dinner, leaving their 2-year-old child in the care of Dolores. Dolores testified that she was home all evening looking after her mother and her niece's daughter, that she only left the house twice, once to buy cigarettes at the cafe right across the street from her house, and once to take out the garbage. She made 2 phone calls that evening, which records confirmed, between 10:34 p.m. and 11:10 p.m. and later again at 11:17 p.m. for 2 minutes. A co-worker of Dolores testified to confirm that Dolores called her that evening to inform her that she could not visit because she had to look after her mother and niece. The prosecution brought in their own witness, a neighbor of Dolores, who testified that Dolores' niece did not arrive on the 9th, but on the next day, the 10th. This is not based on an eyewitness account, but on a conversation she supposedly had with Dolores on the 10th at the wedding they both attended. To accept this witness's testimony, we have to accept that the niece perjured herself, as well as the friend at which they had dinner. Now, Dolores supposedly did not go to the wedding in her own car, but got a ride with someone. She claimed that her car needed to undergo repairs. Investigators thought that she did this because Rocio's body was still in the trunk of her car. An employee from the restaurant testified that on the day of the murder at about 11:30 p.m., Dolores entered the restaurant wearing cycling pants, a sweatshirt and a fanny pack and asked to buy cigarettes. She said that Dolores appeared nervous and out of breath. When she asked Dolores if she had just come back from playing sports, Dolores answered that she went out for a run to clear her head because her mother had been very restless. Now, I'm always skeptical of people who claim they can remember such details after such a long time. But this was not the first time that Dolores bought cigarettes. She probably did it daily. She probably been to that restaurant during different times of the day, wearing different kinds of clothing. Perhaps on a few occasions she did buy cigarettes after coming back from a run. But what was so special about that particular evening that she felt compelled to remember Dolores? What time she arrived, exactly what she was wearing, and what they conversed about. It's not like Dolores was announced as the suspect the very next day. Dolores does not deny buying cigarettes that evening, but I would be very cautious to accept the employee's recall as a fact in the absence of any corroborating information. No one else saw Dolores wearing sports clothes out jogging that evening. The employee was observant, judging by how she could remember what Dolores was wearing. Thus it is strange that she did not observe the blood spatter that would have been on Dolores' clothes. So one of the 21 pieces of circumstantial evidence that the prosecution put forward was that the same employee saw a disproportionate amount of smoke and fire coming out of Dolores' chimney a few days later on a day it wasn't even cold. When Dolores was asked about this, she said she was cleaning out soot from the chimney. Now we are supposed to think that Dolores was burning evidence in her fireplace. Now it was November, the beginning of winter. It was a good time as any to get ready for a winter by cleaning the chimney out. When cleaning soot out, it is possible that it can combust and cause a chimney fire, which would explain the so-called disproportionate amount of smoke and fire that came out of the chimney. By introducing this so-called evidence, the prosecution was just clearly clutching at straws. So putting everything together, in essence, the prosecutor painted the following scenario. Leaving her 2-year-old niece alone with her invalid mother, Dolores went out jogging that evening carrying with her a stiletto knife, without anyone seeing her. At about 10 p.m., she unexpectedly encountered Rocío. They argued, and after hitting Rocío in the face, she offered Rocío a tissue to clean herself up. Then Dolores stabbed her, killed her, and then dragged her body to hide it. Remember that investigators were convinced that 2 people must have dragged the body due to the steepness of the terrain. But somehow now they figured that Dolores could have done it by herself. She exercised regularly, she did karate, and she could carry her invalid mother around the house, which weighed about the same as Rocío. Then after the murder, Dolores must have continued jogging, or she returned to her house, which was only 750 meters away from the murder scene, only an hour and a half later, again without anyone noticing her. Where she, at 11:30 p.m., she first went to buy cigarettes before returning home, without the shopkeeper observing any blood on her clothes or her fanny pack, and Dolores telling the shopkeeper incriminating information that she's been jogging. We are left to wonder how Dolores could have made these calls at 10:34 p.m. and again at 11:19 p.m. if she was out and about jogging. Then a few hours later, Dolores either borrowed a car from a careless tourist, or she managed to get hold of a lowlife who was willing to help her to cover up a murder. I imagine there are no phone records that she called someone, else he would have been brought up in court as very incriminating evidence. So she went to pick up Rocio's body and transferred it to a trunk of a car where she kept it for a few days, again leaving no forensic evidence. And then she undressed the body and got rid of Rocio's underwear and pants somehow, but kept the t-shirt and the sweater. Then she wrapped the body in a plastic bag before purposefully taking it to the location close to where an uncle of Rocío wanted to lease a restaurant. And then to further incriminate the uncle, with whom she had a bad relationship, she staged the body to make it look like a sexual assault, again leaving no forensic evidence. Then later she went back to the crime scene with plastic bags that contained the rest of Rocío's clothes and jewelry, and after she made sure that they were taped up really nice and neat and symmetrical, as only she could do, again leaving no forensic evidence. Well, needless to say, the jury voted 7-2 to find Dolores guilty, and on September the 15th, Dolores was sentenced to prison for 15 years and 1 day in order to pay compensation in the amount of 18 million pesetas, which is about 108,000 euros. And after the verdict, courtroom spectators burst out in applause amidst cheers of joy. Now, something I don't understand, perhaps someone can explain it to me. I see there are quite a few countries that do not require juries to be unanimous to convict the accused, even in homicide cases, unlike, for example, the US and Canada. If some jurors, even if just 1 or 2, deem that there is insufficient evidence to convict, how can that not be considered reasonable doubt? Afterwards, one of the jurors was interviewed by a newspaper, and this is what he or she answered to the question: was there conclusive evidence? Yes, although I can't say much, we are not experts. There was no definite proof. What we did have was a lot of evidence. In a 2021 interview, the prosecutor answered as follows to the following question: what was the accusation against Dolores Vazquez mainly based on? He answered, there was no particularly compelling evidence. There were many indications that, when accumulated, made the accusation sustainable. One of the most compelling evidence was her lies. We had managed to prove that she lied on several occasions, and that ended up incriminating her. It made no sense for her to lie about relatively banal things. It would have been very comfortable to pull back, but we were convinced that she was responsible for the death. We understood that the evidence was sufficient because we were convinced. You have to make a decision, and I wish I had more things, but I had what I had, and I had to move forward. After the verdict in sentencing, many legal experts and practitioners in Spain spoke out against the guilty verdict. The consensus was that there simply wasn't sufficient evidence presented to the court to support the guilty verdict, and many agreed that keeping Dolores in prison for a year before the trial was extremely prejudicial against her. And then about 4 months later, on January the 29th, 2002, Dolores' lawyer appealed to have the trial annulled. And then a few days later, on February the 1st, 2002, the Supreme Court did annul the sentence and ordered that Dolores be retried with a new jury, and the trial was set to take place in the autumn of the next year. Here are some of the key reasons for the Supreme Court's decision. Firstly, the verdict was not based on direct evidence, but on circumstantial or inferential evidence. The jury did not specify what evidence was used to support their conviction. The verdict contained nothing more than a mere catalogue of evidence that explains nothing. In simple terms, the Supreme Court basically said that They could not base their verdict on opinions and feelings. They need to be able to explain their reasoning for arriving at the verdict. You can't just list all the circumstantial evidence. Why, for example, did they dismiss the testimony of the two alibi witnesses? Why did they accept the shopkeeper's testimony over Dolores' testimony? Why did they reject the alibi telephone conversations? Why did they accept the bizarre theory that the prosecutor came up about how the accused got hold of a vehicle that evening? A week later, on February the 8th, Dolores was provisionally released on bail for 30,000 euros after she had spent 17 months in prison. She also had to surrender her passport and submit to searches of her home and property by the civil guard at any time they choose. Now, still convinced that Dolores is guilty, and perhaps fearing that Dolores may come after them, 4 days later, on February the 12th, the Wannikhof family appealed against the Supreme Court's decision. And then 4 months later, on June the 24th, the Superior Court of Justice denied the Wannikhof family's petition and upheld the Supreme Court's decision of Dolores' provisional release. So while waiting for a new trial on August the 14th, 2003, something happened that turned this case against Dolores on its head. On this day, 17-year-old Sonia Karabrantes went missing near Coin while attending a festival. After an extensive search, her body was found a week later hidden under some heavy rocks near a road in a very remote area. Sonia was severely assaulted. There was 37 injuries from blows to her body and her head. And then she was strangled with a shirt. Decomposition prevented authorities from verifying whether a sexual assault occurred or not. Under Sonia's nails, they found skin cells from her scratching the assailant. The civil guard tested it, and the results shocked them to the core. For the DNA was a match to the DNA found on a cigarette butt was found at the primary crime scene of Rocio's murder. The same cigarette butt the police forgot about, and it was never mentioned in the trial. But the police still did not know who the DNA belonged to, as it was still not in any database. Now this case exploded in the media. A woman named Cecilia saw the news and immediately thought that her ex-husband, called Tony King, may have murdered Sonia. So she called the police and told him that on the night of Sonia's appearance, he came to her home with a bandaged hand, scratches on his face and blood on his clothes. He explained that he had been in a fight at the festival in Coin. He also told the police that he used to smoke Royal Crown cigarettes, which turned out to be the same type as found at Rocio's crime scene. Undercover police officers went to a bar where King worked, and there they retrieved a cigarette butt that he left in an ashtray. A DNA analysis was done with this cigarette butt, and it murdered the DNA found on Sonia's nails, as well as on the cigarette that was found at the scene of Rocio's murder. Police finally had their man. On 18 September 2003, the police arrested Tony King, and they soon discovered his real name was actually Tony Bromwich, known in England as the Holloway Strangler. In 1986, when he was 19 years old, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for strangling and then sexually assaulting 5 women in London. After his release in 1991, he was convicted again and imprisoned for robbing a woman at gunpoint. After he was released again in 1996, he changed his legal name to Tony Alexander King. He married Cecilia and then moved to the Costa del Sol in 1997. It was at this time that Scotland Yard or Interpol warned Spanish authorities that the dangerous sex offender had moved to the area. Now, King was obsessed with bodybuilding, and steroids caused him acute impotence. It is said that the sexual frustration generated in him by this impotence led to an unbearable need to impose himself violently, especially after he had consumed drugs or alcohol. Take note that he did bodybuilding. So I'm pretty sure he had the strength to drag, lift or carry a 60-kilogram body all by himself without any help. So at the time of Rocio's murder, King worked as a salesperson in a timeshare resort, which is also a place where Rocio's mother was employed as a cleaner, and they have apparently met each other on occasion. So on the day of King's arrest, and even before King had the opportunity to tell his story, Rocio's mother told the newspaper that Dolores was the murderer and that she paid King to help her. Elvira Vasquez, Dolores' sister, in turn said that she hoped that the police don't make the same mistake with Tony King as they've made with Dolores. On September 19, 2003, the day after these public accusations of her complicity with Tony King, Dolores held a large press conference in which she reiterated her innocence and denied that she knew Tony King and that she had any dealings with him. On September the 21st, King appeared before a judge to determine if he should stay in prison or whether he should get a provisional release. At this appearance, as he did in his initial statement to the police, King admitted that he murdered Sonia and Rocío and that he did so by himself. He also confessed to the rape or attempted rape of at least 3 other women, but he couldn't remember the details because he was heavily under the influence of alcohol. Because of his impotence, apparently, he wasn't always successful in carrying out the rape. The judge ruled that he should stay in prison. The day after King confessed, Alicia, Rocio's mother, and her lawyer said that the cigarette butt with King's DNA is insufficient to link him to Rocio's murder. On September 20th, the day before King's hearing, the police also arrested a man called Robert Graham, who was a good friend of King, and they charged him with covering up the murder. Now, Graham and King apparently once shared a prison cell back in England. According to Graham, the accused told him on the night of the crime that he had been very harsh with a girl and that he believed that he left her dead, while at the same time showing him several pieces of clothing which could have been the victim's. He did not tell the police about this because he was scared of King. On 23rd of September, Graham appeared before a judge, and the judge released him because the charge of covering up a crime had a statute of limitations of only 3 years. Thus, since Rocio's murder happened more than 3 years ago, he could not be charged with that crime, even if he was guilty. After this, Graham then left Spain to go and live in Egypt. About a month later, on October the 15th, 2003, in light of King's confessions, a judge dismissed all charges against Dolores and returned the €30,000 bail money to her, and all restrictions were lifted. Unfortunately, in the eyes of many, especially Rocio's family, Dolores remained guilty. During my research, I came across an online chat room about the murder of Rocío Wanninkhof. One person posted a story of how when she told her mother, who closely followed the Dolores trial, that Tony King confessed to the murder of Rocío. Her mother answered, "With a face like hers, she must have been involved somehow." With a face like hers, she must have been involved somehow. On 13 November 2003, King again had to appear before a judge who was appointed to investigate the murder of Rocío Wanninkhof. Now, during this appearance, King changed his story. He said that although he was present at the murder, his friend Robert Graham was the one that killed Rocío. Supposedly because Rocío discovered something about the Russian mafia money laundering operations in Costa del Sol. Graham was supposedly part of a gang that was in cahoots with the Russian mafia. King said that on the evening of October the 9th, while visiting Graham, they went out to buy cigarettes. This is when they came across Rocío. Graham told him that he knew Rocío, and after a short conversation, Graham suddenly stabbed and killed Rocío. Fearing for his own safety, Tony then assisted in moving the body and covering up the crime. So in light of King's accusation, 6 days later on November the 19th, 2003, a judge summoned Graham to appear before the court as a defendant. He returned from Egypt to attend the court hearing, and on December the 4th, the judge released him. He was not charged, and there were no provisions. He then returned as a free man to Egypt. It seems that the police could not find any evidence to substantiate King's allegations that Graham was responsible for the killing of Rocío. On March 9, 2004, King got himself a new lawyer, Javier Savreda. He was a renowned criminal defense lawyer in Spain and has had many high-profile clients, including Saddam Hussein. As part of the ongoing investigation, King again appeared before a judge in April 2004. With this new lawyer by his side, he now had a different version, a third one. He claimed that not only was Graham involved, but another person as well. Can you guess who? Yes, none other than Dolores Vasquez. They knew that Rocío's family still considered Dolores a suspect and held some sway over the media and the public. So why not exploit that to inject a healthy dose of doubt into King's case? Some may say this is a clever defense strategy. I say it's immoral and unethical. His lawyer said that King's earlier version was influenced by his previous lawyer and that he's now telling the truth. King has even sworn by his daughter, who he loves most in the world. Sadly, his daughter died 3 years later, at the age of 10, after drowning in a swimming pool. So ever since Dolores was first accused of being an accessory of King's, the civil guard did a thorough investigation to determine if there were any connections between Dolores with King or with Graham, but none could be found. I am pretty sure that they would have been quite happy to find something, to save some face after their earlier failures. During an interview in 2021, the prosecutor said the following: "The relationship between them," referring to Dolores and Tony King, "was deeply investigated. Some elements brought them closer in time and space, but they were discarded. There was no connection. The matter is closed." On the 25th of November 2004, 5 years later, the DNA analysis of the hair found in Rocío's body is revealed. The hair belonged to Tony King. Apparently back in 1999, the technology to analyze the DNA of a hair without the root attached to it did not yet exist, or the Spanish authorities have not yet availed themselves to that technology. I don't know which it is. In October and November 2005, Tony King was tried for the murder of Sonia Carabrantes. He was found guilty and sentenced to 36 years in prison. During the trial, he said that Dolores paid him to do it, to divert attention away from her as her new trial date was getting closer. About a year later, on November the 20th, 2006, the trial for the murder of Rocío started. There were two prosecutors in the case, the state prosecutor and the private prosecutor. The private prosecutor was a lawyer working for the Wannikhof family, and his mission was to make the trial about Dolores. One of the witnesses that was called by the private prosecutor was Josefa Hornos, Rocío's aunt, sister of Alicia Hornos. She testified that Dolores habitually and systematically mistreated Rocío, and that she has threatened to kill Rocío 3 times before. The same old story as before. Each time it just gets a little bit worse. She said that King must have helped Dolores to kill Rocío. Rocío's mother, Alicia, testified that she never thought that Tony King was her daughter's murderer, and that she'd always thought that it was Dolores. Even the psychologist who previously testified that Dolores was a short-tempered, repressed homosexual with excessive violent tendency testified during this trial as well. King testified that he was just a scapegoat and that Graham and Vasquez were the real murderers. He said while visiting his friend Robert Graham, drinking and doing drugs, Graham hypnotized him. While under hypnosis, Dolores arrived with another man. When he woke up from hypnosis, he was in the passenger seat of a Ford Fiesta. Graham was driving. Rocío and Dolores and the other man were in the back, where he saw Dolores laughing while stabbing Rocío in the back. As this did not kill Rocío, Graham had to cut Rocío's throat in the trunk of the car. He said he was not present when Rocío's body was discarded. Cecilia, King's ex-wife, testified that on the night of Rocío's disappearance, when he came home, he went straight to have a shower and to change his clothes. He then cleaned the bathroom thoroughly, and then he left the house again after borrowing the neighbor's car, which was a Ford Fiesta. What made her suspicious was that the husband never cleaned the bathroom and that she later couldn't find the clothes that he wore. She confirmed that King smoked Royal Crown cigarettes and that they used plastic bags at home similar to the industrial type garbage bags that were found next to Rocío's body. The neighbor who lent King the Ford Fiesta testified that when he returned the car a few hours later, it was in the same condition. There were no blood marks or anything inside it. He was, however, angry that it took him so long to return the car. This woman testified that King's ex-wife told her about her suspicions, but she didn't think anything of it because they were having marital problems. She also said that a few days later, somebody tried to burn her Ford Fiesta. Our investigators testified that the link between Dolores and Tony couldn't be established and that there is no evidence linking her to Rocío's murder. Now, the jury was unanimous in finding King guilty for the murder of Rocío WanninkhOf. The jury also unanimously rejected mitigating circumstances of mental illness that the defense had requested, as well as the request for clemency. However, they voted 7-2 that King did not act alone, that he must have had at least 2 accomplices. And the reasons for their conclusions are as follows. The handkerchief was offered to Rocío by a known person. Rocío's body could not have been dragged by a single person. That the sticker was found indicated someone that participated in a search was involved in the disposal of Rocío's body. The body was supposedly thrown over a fence which required the assistance of more than one person. And that Rocío's body was abandoned near the restaurant indicates that the perpetrators of the crime wanted to harm the family, i.e. the uncle of Rocío's. Unbelievable, ladies and gentlemen. So the jury, the same people who were previously infested with anti-Dolores sentiment and influenced by the private prosecution's effort to drag Dolores into a case that wasn't even about her, yet could not help themselves to cast a shadow of suspicion over Dolores, based on zero evidence, and rejecting the testimony of investigators that testified that there were no links between Dolores and King. Dolores was eventually exonerated, and the Ministry of Justice compensated her with €120,000 for the 519 days that she spent in prison. She has not yet received an official apology. In 2021, the prosecutor was asked if he would ever ask Dolores for forgiveness. This was his answer. I sincerely believe that I would not ask for forgiveness, for one reason. When did you ask for forgiveness? You deliberately hurt someone. If I have to apologize, 100 other people have to do it too. I wouldn't mind apologizing because we were really wrong. But when someone in his job has to accuse someone, he does it thinking that it is the right thing to do and that the law and the evidence protect him. I wouldn't have any problems, but I did my job the best I knew how. It is true that we were wrong and that I would have received compensation, but forgiveness is associated with someone who has done something wrong. You had done nothing wrong? You think that having a press conference about the fibers that did not even come from Dolores' clothes was not wrong? You think that coming up with that crazy stealing a tourist car theory is not wrong? Presenting a case to court with no direct evidence, you believe that is not wrong? And it is really sad and quite disturbing that you do not understand the concept of evidence. And sadly, to this day, Alicia Hornos still believes that Dolores murdered her daughter and does not shy away from expressing it in the media as in television documentaries. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. I've given you a lot to think about. This was a terrible miscarriage of justice. There are many people involved in causing this. The media, the family, justice system, the police. Everybody have a portion of blame to share. And what the scary thing is, that what happened to Dolores can happen to anyone. Pray that you're never in the wrong place at the wrong time. Pray that you never say the wrong thing to someone that gets murdered. Because who knows, it might be held against you. With that, I leave you, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, goodbye.